How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to talk about bell housings. We have a low budget cast option, and then we also have some of the QuickTime options here for you racers out there, or for anybody who's looking for their more performance oriented bell housing. So first thing let's talk about the cast bell housing. So this is a TIC Performance product, and what it is a replacement of the OE F-body bell housing. So the original F-body 98 to 02 LS1 F-body would have came with a bell housing just like this with a T56 bolted to it. It's very similar to the GTO bell housing. You can use it in a GTO as long as you're not using the GTO starter, I believe. There's always been a little confusion on that and the problems that come along with it because the starter location, or the starter itself on the GTO, is a little different as far as how it's made on the snout. So in a GTO, if you're using an F-body starter, I believe you can use this bell housing. But the main use for this isn't necessarily to replace your OE bell housing, because most guys don't just need a new bell housing that's the same for no reason. Most guys need a new one because they're doing a swap into something. So if you've got an old Chevelle or Camaro that you're building a cruiser, you're putting an LS in it with a T56, or you've got a Magnum F that you're putting in there, this is the bell housing that you're going to want, because it's the lowest investment as far as what you're going to have to pay to get it. It's affordable, it works, it's going to connect you all up just like you need, and it's not overly complicated, it's not heavy, you don't have to really do the indexing portion like you do with the QuickTimes, and really, so if you're just building a cruiser or a street rod or something, it's really all you need. Now on the flip side of that, if you're going to be going racing and you're going to be going drag racing, whether you're driving on the street or not, you can have a street car and also drag race it, but if you're in a competition setting, and you think you're going to be driving the car in a manner that you're worried about the clutch potentially causing an issue or coming apart or any kind of failure in the bell housing area, it's very highly recommended that you use one of these type of bell housings, an SFI approved bell housing. More so than that, even without the SFI sticker, a bell housing that's made out of steel that's explosion proof. You can get really exotic with titanium bell housings and things like that, and those work great. They cost a lot of money. They'll save a lot of weight. But as far as best bang for the buck, it's really hard to beat the QuickTime stuff. That's why we inventory. So in front of me today, I have two examples of those QuickTime bell housings. These are made to work with LS engines and some of the Gen 5 LT engines as well. And these are the two that we keep in stock. One thing that we get asked quite a bit is if this will work with an original TR6060. And the TR6060 from a Challenger, a Camaro, a Mustang, if you have a GT500 or something like that, those bell housings and front plates are integrated together. So where the old style T56 and stuff would mate to this bell housing, those don't do that. So you can't use this in those applications. You can't use it with an actual 6060. And converting one of those 6060s to have this style of bell housing and front plate isn't necessarily an easy job. So I'm going to talk about the differences between the two QuickTime bell housings that we stock, the RM8019 and the RM8020. The RM8019 is a non-SFI approved, low-profile bell housing. The bottom of the bell housing, it comes around and it attaches to this plate. And what this plate does is it protects the back of the oil pan from a clutch explosion. What the RM8019 does not have are bolts down there. And that's why they call it their low-profile bell housing, because what they're doing is eliminating that extra length of bell housing that hangs below the engine and below the rest of the drivetrain. If you've ever ran one of the 8020s on the street or on anything, you know that that part of the bell housing hangs lower than anything under the car. So what the 8019 is a bell housing that eliminates that section of material to give you more ground clearance under the car. It's not SFI approved. Moving on to the RM8020, it is SFI approved. And that flange does hang low on the bottom side of it. And what that allows it to do is it allows that explosion brace, or the piece that keeps the oil pan from being damaged by an exploding clutch, it keeps that completely bolted all the way around. So there's no gap in it that could allow it to flex or come apart. So these bell housings are about $100 difference in price, with this one being a little cheaper. One of the things that comes along with having a bell housing like this is that they need to be indexed. These are, I believe, roll formed and then welded, like flange, laser cut flanges welded onto the bell housing. And so basically this metal has been worked into shape using heat and using force and friction. And sometimes that can cause these things not to be perfectly aligned. I do realize that when they weld these and when they machine these, they're in fixtures, so they get them as close as they absolutely can. But because they're welded components, we always recommend checking the alignment. And the way to do that is to have an indexing plate, is what we call it. And basically what it does is it represents the front of the transmission, or the front plate of the transmission. It has dowel pins in it, and it locates into the face of the bell housing just like the transmission would, and it bolts to the bell housing using the hardware that the transmission would have in it, holding it to the bell housing. And essentially what it has is a circle in the center that's on center of the crankshaft. So it dowels in the back of the block, bell housing dowels onto the block, and then this is meant to be true center of the dowels in the block, if that makes any sense. So what you can do once this is all together, indexing plate bolted to the bell housing, you're going to put an indicator on there, and you're going to sweep this hole, and that's going to be able to tell you how far out of center or how concentric the bell housing is to the center of the crankshaft. And the general rule of thumb from QuickTime is under 10 thousandths. I personally like to be under 8, but under 10 thousandths is the rule that QuickTime puts out there. The plate itself that we have made is a little different than some of the other offerings out there. We put a very large circular hole in our indexing plate, and the reason that we did that is because some guys have ones with a really small opening inside of them, and it makes it really hard to get the indicator in there and set up properly because you don't really have any room for your hands, you don't have any room to work, and it's just a little bit cumbersome to try to do that. So we've put an enlarged hole in ours to ensure that it's not difficult to work on. One other thing that I like to check on any of these welded bell housings is how parallel they are between the surfaces. So I have a flat surface that I will sit these on, and then I have a flat indicator that I can sweep the top of this with just to see how flat it is or how truly flat it is. Something else that we've done here is we've put these in a mill, one of the CNC mills, and actually indicated it with a probe to see how accurate it was as far as height. And I have seen some discrepancy in some of these as far as how parallel they are. So I always check those when I'm installing these. So one of the things that I recommend doing when you're installing one of these bell housings is sand these surfaces, the transmission surface and the bell housing surface. And the reason for that is because this has powder coat on it, and you can see it pretty well that anytime powder coat gets to a corner or an edge, it tends to build up. So you can see it on this plate that it's built up in a place or two, and that can cause, if you're trying to measure to see if it's parallel, that can cause it to show that it isn't parallel. So what I like to do is sand all these surfaces really well with some 80 grit sandpaper, and then come back over it with some 120, maybe a DA sander. And you don't have to take it down to bare metal. You're just trying to smooth it out as much as you can to get a good reading on how parallel the bell housing surface is. We're really excited about our new T56 swap bell housing. It's a cheap, lightweight, affordable option for any guys that are doing a swap or need an F-body replacement bell housing. We have loads of these cast bell housings in stock and ready to ship today. So as I mentioned before, we have all of these options in stock, and we also sell plenty more other options on our website, tickperformance.com.